private parts as piranha bait. Dumb ways to die. So many dumb ways to die.
Anyway, welcome to Otherworldly. Tonight we are talking about not necessarily dumb ways to die, but many dumb things that you probably shouldn't do. This is the subtext title is going to be learn from other people's mistakes or stupid people tricks, because there you are. You can it's a good thing to learn from other people's mistakes instead of your own. This arose from a wonderful conversation with one of my friends who was talking about now we have, unfortunately he doesn't seem to have made it here because he sometimes falls asleep of the evening, and he was going to be my primary guest, but he knows Stones maybe or maybe not as well as Starwolf. And so he is he lost a friend because he was at her house once and he saw her putting various tumbled crystals into her baby's bottle of juice because she wanted the baby had failure to thrive, and she was trying to give all these positive influences that you get from various crystals to the baby, but she didn't have sufficient information. And I think that is frequently one of the issues that causes problems like this. Is we are, many of us, we all start out as beginners, and she hadn't realized that some of the things she was putting in. Now, Cransa would have been able to tell us which ones they were, but I think I remember it was malachite, and among others. And the baby got better, but then she got angry because it wasn't. It's embarrassing to realize that you've been doing something that's really bad for your kids. But on the other hand, we do dumb things a lot. I was talking just before we started the recording about when I was a kid, young woman. I was told that the best treatment for UTI for a young lady is yogurt, and I thought that they douched with it. Luckily, I didn't have that problem. So there you go. But we also used to take gelatin pills to make our fingernails stronger, because gelatin is made out of cow hoofs and things, and therefore it was going to, I suppose, like attracts like, magically it would work. Nutritionally, it's an incomplete protein, and it would not help your nails. There are an awful lot of nutritional things that I have learned over many, many years of long series of looking things up and saying, oh my gosh, I'm doing that wrong. Including important information is B vitamins. You do things like, I think it's B6 that makes your body smell bad, so you don't attract black flies and mosquitoes and other biting insects. And I was taking that, and everybody was being very, very jealous because the bugs were leaving me alone. But one of the things that one day it stopped working, and later I found out why. Almost every B vitamin, because B vitamins occur naturally in foods with other B vitamins. They are synergistic, they need each other. If you take high doses of one B vitamin, you can create a deficiency of other B vitamins because you're taking so many, it's sucking all of the B vitamins in your system to process them. So anytime you're taking a drug or an herb or a vitamin, please look it up and find out which things it is going to, sometimes, as with the bees, it depletes because you are, because it's burning it out of your system. It's not that it's poisoning you or anything. It's just that it's causing your body to process the other thing faster. I have a suspicion that some of the medical conditions that run in families, what's running in the family is a requirement for a greater level than average of a certain nutrient. That family, when they take more of that nutrient, doesn't have that problem. But you know, it's that is a subset of things. Now, when we get to, you know, putting lead in your mouth, which some people do, you got to be careful with crystals. Most of them are fairly inert, but some of them are can be broken down in your body and do bad things. One of the things, horrible stories Carenza told me, was how he had, he's an artist, and he was doing a painting and he used cadmium red, and he had, he knew it was dangerous. He knew cadmium was poisonous. So he carefully, when he was done with it, washed his brushes, washed his hands, wiped his hands, and then he went off and had a bagel. Got sick, woke up in the emergency room, and when he was able to talk, the doctor said, "You're down to 11% of your liver capacity. What did you do?" And he thought back, and he just apparently still had trace amounts of cadmium on his hands, which were carried over onto when he ate the bagel after washing the brushes. I'm guessing that washing the brushes made a nice thin layer of it all over his hands. So there's another thing. You don't think in terms of the paints that you're using being toxic, but many of them are. You all know the story of Mad Hatter and Alice. That the reason that he was mad is because he was exposed to the mercury fumes they use for processing the Eastland. You have a comment on this? Join us.
Yeah, one of the things that I have as one of my basic rules is anytime you're going to handle something and potentially ingest it, either intentionally or accidentally, you need to research it very carefully first. I have no problem with throwing something on my altar and working magic with it. I have no problem with, unless, well, there are certain substances you don't want to put next to your skin because they can be ingested. You can absorb them through your skin, but you need to learn what you're working with. And putting it on your altar is one thing. Putting it next to your body or sticking it in your mouth are totally different risk levels, and you need to be very careful. And I mean, that's just, to me, common sense, but it's very surprising how many people don't follow that chain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of scary, and we don't always have all the information that we would like to have. I'm going to invite Starwolf to give us a quick rundown. He's done this on other shows. If you want to go over to YouTube and look at the other Starwolf channel, you know, I think we may have a cluster of Starwolf things separated. I'm not sure. But he has done a lot of workshops, and I'd like him to run through the don't touch, like do not lick the selenite.
Okay. Basically, let's start with the ones that are safe to wear, but not ingest, or heaven forbid, make an elixir out of. Let's start with anything based on copper. So we're talking malachite, azurite, turquoise.
Turquoise.
I think that, yeah, turquoise is another copper-based mineral.
Oh, yeah.
And especially if you're the sort of
green or greenish,
Blue or
It's
green,
probably
yes.
copper.
Yeah, with the exception maybe of emeralds and green sapphires or green quartz.
Mhm.
Well, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the other one that thankfully I've never run into anybody ever doing is galena. Now, that's a very good grounding stone, but it's basically lead ore.
Mm-hmm.
So
Galena
it's,
is what I've
yeah,
always
galena,
called it.
yeah, I'm from Connecticut.
It's like silver pyrite almost.
Right.
Is a general
Yeah.
description.
There are a few others that I wouldn't make into elixirs simply because they're probably going to dissolve on you, like any of the calcites
Mhm.
or selenite, because they're basically just crystalline calcium. But, you know, for example, the first stones I mentioned, oh, yes, and anything, basically, the other possibilities that could be dangerous is if you've managed to obtain a little piece of silver ore, don't make an elixir out of it because a lot of silver ore contains lead. Roman lead was a byproduct of basically the silver mines in Spain and Britain. But so basically those, if you want to make an elixir, it's real simple. You get a clear plastic or glass bottle, small one. You put your mineral into it. You seal it up so that no fluid is going to get in. I usually drip some wax or something onto the inside of the cap to make sure that you've got a watertight seal. Shut it, put it in the bottle, the jar you're going to use to make your elixir, then add your carrier fluid and whatever other crystals you're putting in. But quartzes tend to be safe. Have we frozen up? Excuse me, need to admit somebody.
I can hear you.
Okay, because Feather Sitch, you froze up for a second. I wasn't sure whether the whole thing froze up. So basically, that's the safe way to do it. Also, I've never heard of anybody doing it, but I can see people crazy enough to do it. The stuff called uranite, which is basically uranium ore. Hard to get these days, but I'm old enough to remember when you could just send away and get the stuff. And indeed, I had the little, I think it was, I forget which company made the Atomic Energy Lab, which gave you a cloud chamber and a really primitive Geiger counter and samples of radioactive material. It was the late 50s, early 60s. They did strange things like that.
I think that may have been the either the Erectoset people or the ones
I think
that
it was
made,
Gilbert. You're right. Gilbert.
Yes.
Because they also did chemistry sets, and I had the big
Mhm.
chemistry set too, the kind that nobody would let a kid play with these days because, well, the thing we won't get into that. Excuse me, needing to add another body. Other
Here. Yay.
there is one other material that I would not use to make an elixir if you ever get hold of it. It's a substance called trinityite. Once again, reason it's radioactive. It is the glass created in Alamogordo, New Mexico in April of 1945 when they detonated the first implosion bomb. Basically, Fat Man's unknown twin.
Mm.
And because this stuff is now for sale, not the really pretty, really hot stuff, but some of the stuff from the periphery is now for sale, like 25 cents for a thumbnail sized sample in a plastic container that you're not supposed to take it out, but well, you know how the people we work with is. They'll pry it out and try to make it into an elixir.
Yeah.
If I can just interject, one of the biggest causes of these kind of problems is when people say, "Don't touch that."
Yeah. Basically, if it's a gem or semi-precious gem crystal like quartz or garnet or or the precious stones like rubies, sapphires, emeralds, no problem. They're pretty much impervious to soaking them in water. And if you soak them in something strong, well, even the people who use vinegar to make their elixirs, that will not hurt them. The other one I'd be worried about is anything containing cinnabar.
Yes.
Because cinnabar, yeah. And though cinnabar quartz or included quartz should be relatively safe because usually the quartz crystal has enveloped the cinnabar and it's safe.
Hello.
I would like to also add that there are times you want to look at the mineral content of your land, especially if you're like me and have well water. What kind of minerals and what kind of things are coming in through your well water that you may be ingesting. And there are certain conditions, some of which are genetic, some are otherwise, where you can overload on certain minerals that can be organic, that can hurt your organs, such as I'm one of those people that lives on land that, as somebody said, oh, if you want to drink a glass of your water, you need a hammer to push that nail down your throat. It's so much iron in it. And we have tons of but most of it is that, oh yeah, all those orange veins or other colored veins, it's full of, iron is everywhere. And I happen to be one of those people who has a genetic sensitivity to iron. It's a condition called PCT, and it hits your liver.
Ooh.
I have had to have.
If you've got it really bad, just bathing in iron-rich water will cause surface burns.
And I had with that condition, it never occurred to me, happened to me until after I had my arm injury, and it only happened on my left hand, which was I have that. I would get blisters that burned and sting, and it's sun sensitive as well. So that if you have that condition and there's that much iron in your blood, because your liver, you don't produce the enzyme that removes the liver, so it all removes the iron, so it all builds up in your liver, and then it's in your blood, and you get these blisters. So I have to be very careful, about how much iron I ingest or am exposed to. And given my well water, that's just a real trip. And doing and sun exposure.
Hello.
Yes.
Also, just being aware of the fact there are things like I would never use any of my native quartz from my land to do any kind of elixir or anything there, because it's like, oh no. So you need to be aware of potential reactions to various medical conditions. That's it.
I'm thinking specifically one area that Chipicon and I both know well, Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, where for many years, people who would go there for an SCA event called Penzic would end up coming down with the, quote, Penzic plague. Then one day I put some of the water from the water system into a plastic bottle and left it on the picnic table in the sunlight uncapped, and about 20 minutes later it had turned rust brown.
I was going to say it was nice and brown.
Yes, it was. And then the thing is, Western Pennsylvania also being iron territory, the water was full of iron and sulfur, and both of those are potent laxatives. Ferrous sulfide is the fastest way to clean you out. And you have all of us people who are used to, city water, drinking water. I've noticed incidences of the Penzic plague have gone away since they put filters on all the water points.
Yeah, but I mean, yes. In my case, my reaction to all the iron, which had probably built up over all the many years of living here and drinking this water once I moved in, plus various other things and my natural genetic propensity, part of my treatment was I had to basically have blood drawn every 30 days for like 6 months to reduce the iron levels in my blood to get rid of that. So yeah, there are times when, you need to be aware of all these environmental issues. And for God's sake, if there's something, that there's going to be sensitive or could be something. Don't, if you already get it, don't add more.
Yeah. I see Carenza has made it, and let's see if his mic is working. I know his video isn't working, but let's see if his mic. Carenza, can you hear me? Can you try and say something?
I can hear you, but
We can hear you. We can hear you.
You're coming in loud and clear.
Absolutely.
It's giving me a little red mic with a line through it.
Ignore
Not
it.
at this side.
No, we can hear you. So, so do you? We've talked. I had Starwolf run through a few of the things you don't want to put in your mouth, like malachite, cinnabar, lead. Do you want?
Azurite, galenite.
Yep.
There's
Touch those.
plenty of them.
Yeah.
But
He ran a laundry list down.
Basically, what I have advertised, the thing is learn from other people's mistakes. And so far we've gotten to the basic, do your research. And a lot of times we just don't think to do our research. And that is a handicap.
When we discussed the topic, which is the last I knew about it, it was stupid things pagans do. And
I prefer to call it stupid people tricks, because everybody does dumb things.
Everybody does dumb things. I told you about Julie, my friend, who was putting all sorts of toxic minerals into her baby bottle.
Yeah. Erg. Okay, the kid made it to 1.
And she stopped talking to me after I told her, bad idea. Because I made her feel stupid.
Well, nobody wants to feel stupid, but nobody wants a dead baby either. So that was a good.
Non-stop. I'm just looking, I'm like, what? You not recognize me all of a sudden?
And my next favorite story actually happened when I was living in Keene. And people I knew in Keene had decided they were going to do a sweat lodge.
Oh, sweat lodges. Good warning.
Oh, yeah.
They had never done a sweat lodge. They didn't have anyone who had done a sweat lodge. They read how sweat lodges were done and went to a place in Vermont and dug a hole and built a sweat lodge and proceeded to do a sweat lodge without anyone on the outside to open the door. They went in wearing jewelry, which meant they got badly burned from the metal. And one of them managed to crawl out from underneath before he passed out. And then one of the girlfriends showed up and found that no one was responding. There was a guy outside passed out, freaked out, and started pulling all the blankets and rugs off.
Good.
And they were unconscious.
Oops.
And this really fits nicely into the stupid things people do.
Mm-hmm.
And doing something like a sweat lodge without any experience really needs to go like in the top 10 of that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes cultural appropriation has its own issues, or as Byron Ballard calls it, cultural strip mining.
Was that by any chance up at a spiritual retreat called Another Place?
I was told about it by people who had been there.
Okay.
The girl.
Then I know where it happened. Yeah.
And
yeah,
it was like, it's the stupidest thing anyone has ever told me they did for a ritual.
I'm going to throw into that is in the category of don't exercise your skepticism when it comes to the gods. Don't pretend that the entities that we're dealing with aren't real. Like, don't stand in a thunderstorm and yell, Thor is a pussy, which he usually just laughs at us. But that is not the only thing that my daughter was talking, was over here. She's around a campfire, a bunch of people, and they said, oh yeah, and then we're going to we need some wisdom, so we're going to invoke the wild hunt, because that's a Celtic wisdom totem, and we're going to bring the wild hunt down on the Penzic. And she basically knocked his head against a tree a few times. You will not do that. I'm just the very concept of, they might. The safety mechanism is that people who do this are often not powerful enough to make it work. That is our only the only safety mechanism. It's a good one, and it usually helps. But at the same time, sometimes they do make it happen. And I had a friend who he was talking to a group of people who were going to go out to a really cool haunted cemetery on Long Island. And they had the copy of the Necronomicon, and they were going to chant it, and they were going to do all the things that it said in there. The problem was that the little purple paperback of the Necronomicon that was everywhere, it's one of the few books that I believe in burning. It has bits and pieces, but it doesn't have all the bits and pieces. Rule of thumb: don't call up what you can't put down. That's just, if you have you don't cast a love spell unless you know how to take the love spell off. You don't cast any spell unless you know how to neutralize it. I mean, how difficult is that?
In deference to Simon, he does state at the beginning of the book that there are no banishments for the beings that this book is capable of invoking. He suggests you learn the Jewish Kaddish, which is apparently a solar invocation. I don't know. I just kind of mumble along when I'm at a funeral.
Kaddish is the prayer that
Prayer
you
for the
say over the dead.
For the dead.
What it does is it is meant to praise God, that say, in spite of the fact that I have lost this person dear to me, I am praising God for being who he is and making the universe work the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, but he very much states that in the beginning of the book, that there is nothing. Oh, excuse me, there's somebody in the waiting room.
I thought I'd let him in.
Okay, just checking.
Back up.
Yeah, but because I collect Necronomicons. I have about 4 different books that purport to be it, and I figure I may have the entire thing at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Though my own opinion is, given when it was channeled to Crowley and when Lovecraft was started mentioning the Necronomicon in his works, it's probably actually the Book of the Law. Which, if you can make it work, good luck.
My understanding was that the little purple book was just bits and pieces of old grimoires that they found, so that it would,
I would
sound cool.
There's a book about the creation of the Necronomicon called Dead Names, which does a reasonably good job. I know most, or knew, seeing most of them are dead at this point, most of the major players in that one. Oh, the good old days.
Yeah. Well, let's see. We got a couple other things from the chat that probably ought to be brought up, like leaving candles unattended.
Oh,
which is a big no-do. Or even if you are attending them, if there's a cat in the room, or I suppose a small child. Anyone else have anything to do that like that? Cats are pyromaniacs. Don't I love the don't challenge the fates. Don't taunt the gods and goddesses. Don't poke the unicorns. Yeah,
And if you're using if you intend on using a lot of candles, put your hair back.
Chipicon.
Yeah.
You remember Tracy?
Hmm.
I don't think you ever got to meet her brother Kirk. As far as taunting the gods and goddesses, he invoked the Morrigan to ask her for world peace.
Oh,
And within a year, he was shot in the back of the head while trying to escape from the police.
oh.
Well, that makes sense, actually.
Yeah, it is one interpretation of what he asked for.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, this falls into another category that has an amusing story. This one is from Isaac Bonewitz, who was talking about there was a group that wanted to invoke wisdom. So many groups need wisdom, and trust me that they really do. But they thought that they would bring down call in Athena, and the high priestess successfully called Athena into this Gardnerian circle. And the first thing she did was she looked up and down, she looked at them, and she looked at herself, and she said, "Why am I naked?" Anybody who knows anything about Athena knows that one of the big things they did was give her new clothes for her statues. And so basically she went up one side of them and down the other. And when she decided to go, they were much wiser. What didn't address what they had been asking, but yeah, do your flipping research. Don't pretend that the entities that we are invoking are mythical. Yes, they are mythical, but they're not invented. They aren't going to do exactly what you say. Don't look up and see, okay, here's an attribute. Okay, I'm going to address this god, and they're going to do me this favor. Why the heck would they, if you have never done anything for them?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to go back, unless anybody has something that they want to attach to that.
The
I
original.
saw a great comment in the chat. Anything is dangerous in sufficient quantities. And that is like water. Kids and teens can learn. You can supposedly get drunk on water. Intoxication point is around the same place as coma and death points. That's disturbing. On the other hand, I remember the story of my mother when she and her friends went on their first unsupervised trip to a hotel and ordered drinks, but they didn't realize that the little tiny glasses that came with their big glasses were the liquor part, and they all got very, very tipsy on the Coke and the tonic and stuff that they were drinking, because they expected to get tipsy, and they didn't know that they had left the alcohol out until somebody tasted it in the morning when they got up and said, what is that? Because it's
well.
So there's
That's an excellent example of mind over matter, however.
That you can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
But,
one of my favorites is the people who tend to try and invoke deities from mutually antagonistic pantheons. For example, doing Greco-Roman and Persian in the same invocation.
Okay.
Simply because there's a lot of very, very bad blood between the Persian deities and especially the Roman ones. The Greeks, they kind of get along with, but when you start doing it you start using Latin, with the exception of Mithras, not a good idea.
Is that because they're trying to call up every god they can find listed that is a deity of the same
Exactly.
thing?
You know,
Okay.
yeah, the problem
It must work better if we talk to more of them.
Yes.
Yeah,
oh,
it's just like I do not invoke the Morrigan because I've been told in a loud voice by Odin not to.
Mhm.
Something to do with a burned temple or something. I also don't get along with Hecate, and I also do not get along. That's bad history back from a long time ago.
I mean, I have different deities I work with, and they're from different pantheons, but I'm very careful which ones I mix with which ones in any given time and place and working. If I'm working with
Exactly.
Hecate, I'm not working with certain other ones. If I'm working with, you have to listen, you have to get the feel, you have to do some study and research too. I mean, you're going to mix pantheons, or even within a pantheon, you might know that this deity and this deity do not get along. Do not put them in the same working, even in the same
Pan and
pantheon.
Apollo. Pan and Apollo, not exactly
not a good combo.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so you have to, especially the more if you cross pantheons and do things, you have to be extremely careful what you're doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
but even within a pantheon,
Yeah,
I've seen people say that Pan and Apollo are two aspects of the same deity.
Mhm.
Like, no, it's like, or the constant Frigga and Freya are just the same.
No.
No way.
They are not.
And when you get to the Norse gods, so many of them have bitter rivalries with each other.
Yeah, you
They
got to be
do.
really careful in there. Norse gods, you got to be careful.
A lot of the good, I would say
I know
any,
their
And
family.
Celtic ones, you've got to be very careful with too.
And while we're
anything that can squish you, you probably should be careful with.
while we're talking about Norse gods, don't go into worshiping Norse gods based on what you understand of them from Marvel movies.
Oh God.
Oh
They
God,
don't get it right.
no, they don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is it's fun, but not
Find some real sources. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
as
Stanley
a
is
friend of mine's experience once said, also be careful. A lot of my fur family are, because I ask them what they want to be named, and some of them do want to be named after deities, after different pantheons, but do not do what a couple that were friends of mine years ago did. They got, first of all, a Dalmatian dog, otherwise known as a damnation, if you know the breed at all, because they're totally wacko. Do not name your Dalmatian Loki.
Don't let your cat
Okay.
Loki.
I have Loki dog stories too.
But this guy, I mean, we were cyclists, and there were a thing called rollers back in the 80s and whatever, where it was these free-falling rollers. You could basically pedal in place in your room and go as fast or as slow as you want, and it was a stationary cycle where you proved your balance as well as just your strength. Well, Loki decided to chase his ankles and try to bite him.
Oh.
He over, lost his balance, shot off the rollers, blew through the end of his room, and slammed headfirst into the concrete wall at the end of the room,
I see.
breaking his bicycle and having a trip to the hospital.
Yeah.
Don't name your Dalmatian a wacko breed of dog Loki.
Yes. Do not name your Doberman Labrador Loki either. Back at the end of the 70s, my first apartment I lived in with a friend who I had as a roommate and her two boys, and she and her boyfriend got a puppy, a Doberman Retriever mix, and named it Loki. And when it got big enough to reach some of the flat surfaces, I woke up one day and came out of the room, and they told me, we owe you money. And I had my only Pisanki egg I've ever made, and I had a Japanese bisque doll that had been given to me as a gift, and it had all been chewed up by this dog. I was never really happy with Loki.
Well,
Okay, we got some more good information from the in the chat, pointing out after a ritual, when you're feeling good, water helps and vitamins, and I know chocolate is very is a great grounding, and we have been given the reminder that when you're doing any sort of intense ritual, make sure there is somebody who is not in it to watch the others. And this goes back to the sweat lodge, but you got to have a caretaker. You got to have somebody there.
That is what the doorkeeper is.
It's quite a it's quite a specialized set of talents to be able to watch the audience and see who's going into a trance and who's wandering off to a different realm. But if you're journeying, it's good to have somebody who can call you back. So I believe I saw enough. Scroll too far. It's like a spot, yeah, spotter if you're having gymnastics. Yeah. Blood magic. Blood magic is definitely a way of getting very intense very fast. So you should be very careful with it. I mean, I think we could always, I think it helps to be trained. It's lovely to have books. We know with a lot of people who've just learned out of books, but like myself, where you learn from books and experience. A lot of these stories from people who picked things up from books who haven't got all the information because the person involved who wrote the book didn't think to warn you about something that is so obvious to them that you don't put your cinnabar in your mouth or whatever. But
or maybe they didn't know and had just never done it. And
Right.
yeah.
And there's always those lucky
would
ones who get away with the stupid things.
Combine
to do it.
Both the modern science and the ancient knowledge, because we've learned things. We now understand why the radium or whatever is not good for you. But you have to believe in both, and you have to respect both. Follow the instructions, for goodness sakes. Read all of the warnings. Read the small print. On the other hand, perhaps it is time for me to jump into the other side of it, things that aren't dangerous. And I'm going to mention spirit boards or Ouija boards. They have such a reputation these days, but they were used from the 1850s, 1860s up to 1960 or so when The Exorcist came out. It started with the book. It started before the movie. And at that point, now we have this big thing for the last 50 years or so. Ouija boards are terribly dangerous. Ouija boards are not necessarily dangerous. I will say that if you are saying, is anybody there? Let's face it, when the spiritualists were using them, they were looking specifically, they were addressing their letters. There were a certain phone number. They were looking for somebody. But is anybody there is opening it up. It's like dialing a phone number to a payphone. And of course, young people aren't going to recognize the idea that you used to be able to call payphones.
Yeah.
But,
or worse,
I
see
the people who will pick up that are just wandering by on the street, unless it's in a mom and pop store and they call somebody to the phone. If it's just somebody on the street, you're liable to get a teenager who has nothing better to do and does not want anything more than to mess around with your brain. So you get some real playful trickster types.
One of the only stories I gleaned from others before I came here tonight, where I posted this in Upstate Witches and Pagans on Facebook, someone who's a high priestess of her coven came back and pointed out that one of the young witches in the coven some years back had called in the wee hours of the morning in the first year of starting the coven, and they had been using a board with friends, and they said all hell broke loose. She was scared and crying. They brought something forth that was, let's say, very unfriendly. So she lost her best friend of 50 years suddenly over this, and would love to talk to her again, but this is what happened when this occurred with the board for them.
Yeah,
The
quite
problem I have with spirit boards and Ouija boards is you are dealing with the spiritual equivalent of an old-fashioned party line telephone. You never, unless you are very specific, you don't know who's on the other end. And I'm just old enough to remember party lines.
And what you have to do is whenever, whether it's through a Ouija board or any other means of casting divination or asking for it, if you're trying to reach out to a being, you need to be very specific for who you're looking for, or what you're looking for, or what information you're looking for, in exactly what parameters. You do not just, hey, what's out there? That's, anytime you're doing this.
Yeah, anyone want to talk to? Someone
It can
will.
be a Ouija board or some other, it can be some, whether you're doing a thing where you cast some little circle and you put some things in it and ask. I mean, I've seen lots of ways that are similar to Ouija boards, but they don't just have the little handy slider. But you need to, anytime you're looking to bring something in from outside, know what you want to bring in from outside, what being or entity or thing you're looking for, and be very precise, because if you every little gap in your precision is an open door for something that you don't want.
It is good to start out with learning to shield and to put up wards, and know who you're talking to, and another story that about how specific the people are. This one came from, well, the personal story. It's another funny story. Right now, is it Starwood or Sirius Rising? I forget. Out in Western New York, there's a big magical, a series of magical conferences at a campground. We decided we would go once. We went. I got to participate. They did a reenactment of an ancient rite where they would take the image of the unseen goddess and wash her in the lake, and then they put her out on a little, still shrouded, and put her on a little island, and that was the first day. And then,
Tacitus.
Yes, Tacitus, and apparently
did they read the last part?
Where nobody is supposed to ever say where they killed the slaves that washed the image.
Yep.
Well, let's say
Similar to Nerthus. Is this similar to what you do with Nerthus?
Yeah,
it is the Nerthus. It's the Nerthus ritual, and somebody went and they looked. They thought they would look under the wrapper and see what they had there. Well, it rained
kaboom!
For 6 days straight. We put down a tarp in front of our booth, and it was like walking on one of those squishy space rides.
Yes.
It was like, it was the most amount of rain they had ever seen, and it was so terribly predictable. But another thing I did there is I attended my very first Sumble with heathens. And they passed the horn around, and everybody raised a horn to somebody. They talked to the Aesir, and then everybody got to do it to somebody of their own. And I had been reading all the books I could get on Scythe. I don't know whether it was 9 Worlds of Scythe Magic. I think it might have been the Jenny Blaine one. It could have been Scythe Ways by John Fries. Anyway, somebody had decided they were going to go to the 9 worlds. And they were going to learn magic of all the different 9 worlds. And they got to, I don't know whether it was Yot 9, it was one of the ones where they're a lot further away from humans than most. and she saw these great
Ironwood.
things and said, I want to learn your magic. And they said, we can't teach you our magic, but we can make you a part of her. Would you like that? And she said, yes. And so they ate her. And she suddenly found her consciousness in a pile of bones kicked at the side of their cave. And she doesn't know how long she was there, but then suddenly Loki showed up and said, boy, you've gotten yourself into it. And yes, and would you like me to help you? Oh, please. And so he danced around her and did some things. And suddenly she was back in enough of a spiritual body that she was able to leave. She said, can I ask you why you helped me? He said, because you drank to me in Sumbul. And so when I got the horn, I toasted Loki, and you could have jaws dropped all the way around the circle. Apparently Loki in most heathen circles is considered the great enemy.
That's called crypto Christianity, but
I believe it does come from the it's like wanting to having the Norse stories being written down through the Christian lens, because somebody, it's like the Brothers Grimm trying to save German folklore. Snorri was trying to save the Norse stuff, but it was all filtered through Christianity.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Loki, so Loki is getting a kind of a bum rap, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary. It always depends on your relationship.
I'm just reading today.
Loki, the way I heard somebody say it very nicely, Loki is usually the one called upon to fix the stuff that he set into motion in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
I was just reading today that Lokian, what they're calling Lokian heathenism, is becoming more popular, more in America than in Europe.
More
people are choosing to follow him as a deity.
So is following Eris and following the Coyote and
Chaos is
Father Legba, and many of the tricksters are very popular in America.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do? What are you going to say? That's an American aspect.
I mean, there are a lot of positive
I
qualities
have
to a
say
trickster.
that way back in my childhood, one of my first things that helped me at a point where I was being bullied and stuff at school was I had this friend that came to me. His name was Herman. Go into about third or fourth grade, and what does Herman translate to? Hermes. Hermes got me, at least let me get even on a lot of times when I did. And so he's been with me for 60 years. And he and Athena were the first two that I ever found when I was in elementary school. Yes, Hermes is a trickster, but I needed exactly that then to get even.
Mm-hmm.
But that's two aspects of wisdom. They have different takes on it. So
yeah.
And the fact they both appeared to me within a few months, that they gave me balance. It was good.
Yeah. One of the things that you just have to be careful and try and think it through, I think. One of my friends lived in a place where her kid, when she had small children, and they didn't have a lot of friends. Not unusual for in a pagan situation. So she thought that it would be fun for them to have somebody to play with. So she called fairies into the yard for them to play with. And with the entirely predictable effects. So just, it's not as bad as in the Wild Hunt. And she did have a certain amount of intent behind it. She wanted gentle, supportive companions. And that's kind of what she got, but they certainly don't have they're not human.
No.
And so that's
not at all.
They don't have the same, this is a bad idea.
Couple
Is there
of-
anybody else that has a nice morning story that they want to throw in here?
Well, several of these stories, topics have reminded me of something like when speaking of Loki, most of the detailed stories we have of the Norse gods come from Snorri,
Mhm.
was born in a Christian land and was writing as a Christian.
Right.
Yep.
Which brings us to one of the points I wanted to make, which is people have this very predictable and odd habit of believing anything they read, which also feeds into some things that I thought was worth mentioning earlier. Is anyone familiar with the book Life Forces?
Sounds familiar.
Okay, the original edition of Life Forces was a vanity book before it was picked up by one of the major publishing houses. And in Life Forces, the anthropologist that wrote it did meticulous research with a great many people and evidently never actually discovered what the goals of some people talking to him was. So he had very, very excellent rituals for summoning the sublunar spheres, all the way up through Pluto, but not a single banishment. I don't.
Yeah, same problem in Simon's Necronomicon.
I can't think of a single reason why you would want to summon the sublunar sphere of Saturn.
Wealth.
Disease. But summoning it into your life without being able to get rid of it again.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the term is irk.
Seems even worse. And then some of the rituals, which I am sure, just as claimed, they were very faithfully recorded and transcribed, and their protective circles are not going to protect you from anything. And
Odd way.
for some strange reason, after a publisher took up Life Forces and an editor who knew something somewhere along the lines, the book that was finally published by a major publishing house, I think it was Weiser. It's about half the size of the first edition. And it brings the question to mind of why is someone writing what they're writing, and depending on what their goal is, how trustworthy is it? Especially the more serious it is.
You need a test kitchen.
And most of us don't know the author or the author's motives. So, I mean, you always have to keep your own personal filter very, very tight and sharp.
Right.
And look for other people's filters. See if you can figure out what they are.
Yeah. And you have to, you cannot just go, oh, somebody wrote this. I'm going to go, yeah, I'm going to try this. No, don't do that.
Oh, this book agrees with me on that.
Always
it must be good.
Think first.
Some authors like Cunningham, his motives seem pretty clear. Raymond Buckland, his motive is just like for the school, to make as much money as possible while presenting the information in the slowest possible format. A lovely school that you can study for 3 years to finally open a salt circle.
And then human capacity of wanting to jump ahead and get ahead and
skip steps.
And in addition to being careful and not jumping in too fast, also be very wary of people who are holding you back because they want to keep control of the power themselves, and be able to. I have encountered that many times in certain circles where people want to retain that power, and anytime anybody else can do something on their own, it threatens them.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that completely.
I see that so many.
Having experiences that outstrips the leaders of whatever, and they're just like, and then they make it like, oh, I'm not playing along and I'm the bad guy. So I've dealt with that for decades. I got to the point that I'm doing this all on my own. Sorry, thanks, bye.
I'm not sure that's I think it's a slightly different topic. That's kind of group interactions as opposed to just.
Yeah. Well, it was brought up, but
yeah, it is.
You're right.
It's important. It's definitely related. But
well, when you see things where people are like, I'm all this and that, and speaking of bad stories, we had a group where this young woman was taking her turn to priestess. She called Frigga for the solstice, winter solstice, and called the fairies, saying that she was a queen of the fairies. Oh my God, the insanity that erupted from that. It was not I'm sitting there, it's like, how do I undo this? Meanwhile, I'm usually the one that has the constitution of a Viking. I could not to be like Thor, but I can drink more than my fair share and keep my wits about me. That evening, that all changed. And the one kid that had no impulse control, he had all the impulse control. And the funny thing is, people were playing with a poi, and the poi was spent, and it was sitting in a dishwasher. It spontaneously combusted. He was the only one who had enough sense to fix that. Meanwhile, I'm dumb enough. It's like, that's Yule. Let's get another log into the brazier, whatever. It was too big of a log. The brazier had a mechanical failure. It collapsed. It showered coals everywhere onto a wooden deck, and and I'm just like, I had like, and the woman that did this, we put out milk and honey, okay, and I'm like, someone check the altar, see if the milk and honey's there. No, she took it away before sunrise. Just get it out there, stat, and then things went normal again. I was just like, the individual that did this, I don't deal with anymore. Dealing with people that claim they know all this, that, and a bag of chips, and they don't have any common sense.
Why my kit usually carries a small vial of powdered iron.
and we have now
Sealy mace.
Our time, so we should probably finish it up. I'm going to hope people continue to hang, because it is so much fun to make fun of the dumb people. But I'm going to turn it off now and thank everybody who has shared their wisdom, because it's always best to learn from other people's mistakes. Mm-hmm. It's so much safer to do that. And it's not that we're being unkind. It's just that I think that many of us we're telling stories on ourselves too. So thanks everybody. And we'll reminding people to tell your friends about it. Now, aren't you going to be really cross if you discover that you were talking to somebody and it turns out that when after the conference they say, why didn't you tell me about that? I would have gone. You got to tell them so that they know.
Spent the last 3 weekends handing out cards.
God bless you. Goddess bless you. And we'll see everybody in November and next week. So
I can add one more example of what not to do. If anybody besides myself has ever read the works of Kenneth Grant, he was very big in ceremonial magic back in the 50s and 60s, and it almost reads like a list of what not to do, because they it seems like every ritual somebody got either seriously injured or dead. And I'm still not understanding, and it's
We have groups of people here that work with the African Orishas, and they first of all they fail to make an offering to Elegua to start it.
Yeah.
Like, number one, and two, they actually had a person I wouldn't trust to hold a rock, you know, and because he was a vampire and uses a shadow self. And guess what? Both instances, there were fires. I'm just, you know,
I wonder why.
Yeah, no kidding. Fires.
Mhm.